I wake before dawn, as I always do, when the quiet hours of the morning still whisper promises of a fresh start. At 33, my life has become a series of precise routines, each one a testament to the devotion I've poured into my role as caretaker. Before my eyes, the soft glow of my computer screen reveals a neatly formatted ledger, a detailed chronicle of every dollar allocated to my parents. This isn't just budgeting, it's the ritual of love and duty, an unwavering commitment that I've come to believe is as sacred as any familial bond. In the silent intimacy of these early moments, I methodically review the month's disbursements. I double-check that the transfer for Dad's medication, clearly noted and carefully considered, is on schedule. I see every expense marked in pen, a silent tally of my sacrifices. The numbers are comforting in their unyielding certainty. And yet, even as I tally every cent, a small, unspoken question lingers. Is this the measure of my love? I choose to believe that love, in its truest form, is the very reason these transactions exist, a promise made to honor and protect the ones I hold dear. The day gradually unfolds as the gentle clatter of footsteps downstairs signals the arrival of another ritual, the family breakfast. I step into the warm embrace of the kitchen, where the aroma of freshly ground coffee mingles with soft murmurs that have become all too familiar. As I greet my parents, the air feels charged with an almost imperceptible tension. My mother, Catherine, offers a reserved smile, polite and measured, while my father, Charles, nods in acknowledgement, his eyes betraying an expectation that I have already internalized. Their greetings, while superficially affectionate, seem woven with an unspoken currency, a reminder that, in many ways, I am less a daughter and more the family's lifeline. Even as I pour coffee and delicately arrange breakfast on the table, I can't ignore the glimmer of a thought. These interactions are punctuated by a rhythm that feels almost transactional. A subtle comment here, a fleeting glance there. The nuances of our conversation suggest that my contributions have become part of an unspoken ledger of gratitude. There is a faint undercurrent of entitlement in the way expectations are exchanged. My acts of care are measured not just in love, but in carefully calculated costs. I watch as my parents' eyes briefly dart to the clock, as though marking the passage of time until the next deposit is due. In these moments, I cling to the belief that my dedication is noble, even if the price of love sometimes feels too steep. And so, the morning unfolds, quiet, routine, and steeped in both warmth and a subtle melancholy. I am Elena, the devoted daughter whose careful budgeting and patient sacrifice have come to define my everyday. Yet, behind the facade of order and loving duty, a fragile illusion is beginning to form, one that hints at a future where the true cost of my dedication might finally be revealed. The day unfolds with a subtle shift. As the early morning chaos of routines settles into the background, I find myself inadvertently tuning into conversations that once blended into the fabric of our daily lives. Preparing breakfast later that morning, I linger in the hallway, half hidden by the interplay of light and shadow, when I catch snippets of dialogue that I wish I hadn't heard. From the adjacent room, my brother Nathan's voice floats casually through the thin walls. I overhear him remark to a friend on the phone, "Yeah, it's always the same. She handles everything. It's like she's a never-ending checkbook." His tone is light, almost dismissive, as if my care could be substituted for a simple chore or routine expense. I feel a cold knot tighten in my stomach, a feeling that my contributions, once the very embodiment of familial love, are being treated as if they were mere remittance. Later, as I clean up and settle down in a quiet corner of the living room, I start reflecting. In the silence, thoughts begin to echo. Is the warmth in my parents' eyes truly fondness, or is it tempered by a transactional calculation? I revisit each encounter of the last few months, the crisp nods at breakfast, the polite smiles that felt rehearsed. Every shared word now carries a faint sting of doubt. I question if the affection I've always believed in is real or just a facade, a ledger of unpaid debts disguised as love. The realization is unsettling. Perhaps my delicate balance of care and sacrifice has unwittingly become a currency in an unspoken exchange. my very essence measured against obligations and entitlements. These first signs of discrepancy, the whispered remarks and the uneasy introspection, mark a turning point, a quiet unraveling of the comfortable lies I've clung to for so long. In that reflective solitude, I cannot shake the growing certainty that the foundation of my familial bonds may be built more on obligation than on genuine love, setting the stage for further revelations. Midday found me lost in the habitual scroll of messages on my phone, a welcome distraction from the mounting undercurrents of doubt. As I casually opened a group chat named simply Family Circle, a string of messages caught my eye. One entry, sent by my brother Nathan, sent a shiver down my spine. Nathan, seriously, having Elena around is like having our own family ATM. She covers everything for us, like it's no big deal. In that moment, the gentle hum of everyday life faltered. The words, so carelessly thrown about, were like shards of broken glass slicing through the familiar veneer of love and duty. I read and reread the message as if expecting it to change or vanish. Yet there it was, brutally unmasked, a casual confession of my role reduced to a perpetual financial lifeline. I staggered back from the screen, overwhelmed by an avalanche of disbelief, anger, and heartache. The room I once regarded as a sanctuary suddenly transformed into a stage set for betrayal. I found myself collapsing onto the edge of my bed, clutching the phone as if it were an accusation I couldn't escape. In the familiar solitude of my room, every cherished memory, each act of care, every selfless sacrifice masqueraded now as a transaction in a ledger of familial convenience. The stark realization that my love had been weighed and measured, that I was nothing more than an endless resource, ignited a flood of bitter tears and searing isolation. I sat at my dining table long after the echoes of our breakfast had faded, the soft lamplight casting familiar shadows across piles of bank statements and receipts. Methodically, I began retracing each transaction, a monthly transfer that I had believed was solely for my parents' well-being. As I printed out each statement, my gaze fell upon a line item labeled Additional Contribution that had, month after month, quietly bolstered an account I had never seen a purpose for. My heart pounded with an increasing rhythm of dread and betrayal, as every number on those pages unveiled a secret ledger of my own dedication. In the quiet hum of the evening, the numbers ignited long-forgotten flashbacks. I recalled a family discussion over dinner, my father casually mentioning a new investment opportunity, while my mother smiled in quiet approval. At the time, I had trusted the conversation for its benign nature. Now, those words echoed with sinister undertones. The investment, as I soon pieced together, was a hefty down payment on a lake house that I never heard about, a purchase that had been funded entirely by my hard-earned money. The memory was like a half-remembered dream turned nightmare, where every detail, every offhand comment morphed into undeniable proof of my exploitation. Scrolling further through old receipts and digital confirmations, I uncovered invoices for what were billed as special family occasions, vacation bookings, gourmet dinners in locales I'd never visited, even expenses casually dubbed as an allowance for my brother's whims, all inadvertently documented details that painted a grim picture. I remembered Nathan's offhand jokes and the dismissive tone in which my contributions were discussed. They had been dismissed as mere facts of a long-standing arrangement, never questioned, never acknowledged as the currency of my own sacrifice. Each receipt was a fragment of a conversation I had overheard, snippets of entitlement, a subtle arithmetic of who owed what that made my relentless generosity seem less like love and more like an endless loan. As I gathered these pieces in front of me, the room around me transformed from a familiar refuge into a stark gallery of memory and betrayal. The montage of small, dismissive remarks played in my mind, the nonchalant laughter over dinner when Nate referred to the funds like they were spare change, the resigned sighs from my parents when discussing the future, as though they had predetermined my role in their financial plans. Each memory was a small betrayal, insignificant on its own, but cumulatively forming a crescendo of manipulation. In that solitary moment, I felt as though layers of my identity were peeling away, replaced by a raw, searing awareness of what I had been giving away without demand or receipt. As I gathered these pieces in front of me, the room around me transformed from a familiar refuge into a stark gallery of memory and betrayal. The montage of small, dismissive remarks played in my mind. The nonchalant laughter over dinner when Nate referred to the funds like they were spare change. The resigned sighs from my parents when discussing the future, as though they had predetermined my role in their financial plans. Each memory was a small betrayal, insignificant on its own, but cumulatively forming a crescendo of manipulation. In that solitary moment, I felt as though layers of my identity were peeling away, replaced by a raw, searing awareness of what I had been giving away without demand or receipt. The evidence was undeniable, and with it came a profound emotional confrontation. I stared at the bank statements, the receipts trembling between my fingers, and for the first time, I questioned the cost of my unconditional care. The realization that my love had been measured, dissected, and repurposed into luxuries I had never personally enjoyed struck me with a disarming clarity. This wasn't an act of familial support. It was the unraveling of an illusion, the slow exposure of a system built on my undivided, unappreciated sacrifice. The simmering anger and mounting hurt refused to remain silent any longer. Tonight, at the family dinner, the carefully maintained facade of cordiality is destined to crumble under the weight of unspoken truths. When I step into the dining room, the air is thick with an uneasy tension. Catherine offers her customary polite smile, her eyes betraying a hint of apprehension. Charles sits silently, his expression unreadable behind the dim lamplight. And Nathan exchanges a fleeting, almost dismissive glance with my parents before resuming idle chatter about trivial matters. Every small gesture now seems loaded with implication, as if each one were a marker of the exploitation I've long endured. Unable to hold back any longer, I clear my throat. The moment the sound ripples through the room, conversation dies, and every pair of eyes fixes on me. Studying my racing heartbeat, I begin. There's something I need to say. I pause, letting the silence swell, and then continue with a voice that trembles with controlled fury. For years, I've poured my heart, time, and money into this family, a devotion I believed was unconditional love. But I found out something that I can't ignore. I discovered your texts, the way you talk about me like I'm nothing more than a bank account, a family ATM. The words, each laced with a mix of hurt and indignation, seem to reverberate off the walls. Catherine's eyes widen, a flash of remorse mingling with contrition, while Charles shifts uncomfortably in his chair, his silence speaking volumes of his own denial. Nathan squirms under the weight of his guilt, stumbling over weak defenses, his earlier casual demeanor now replaced by palpable anxiety. I demand, is my care so disposable that I'm reduced to a means of funding your lives? Why must I learn the truth in such a callous way? Even as my voice cracks slightly with the force of my conviction, I refuse to let the tears fall. Instead, I stand defiant, exposing the raw betrayal for all to see. The fallout is immediate and devastating. The dinner stretches on in a stifling silence, punctuated only by the clink of cutlery and the heavy sound of unspoken words. In that charged aftermath, I find myself isolated, surrounded by family, yet desperately alone. Their eyes dart away or remain fixed in uncomfortable silence, and the warmth that once defined our interactions has been replaced by a cold distance. The realization that my very act of loving had been measured, discounted, and repackaged as a familial obligation leaves me with an inescapable void. I leave the dinner with the taste of bitter liberation lingering on my tongue. In that moment, I understand that speaking the truth has not mended our bonds. It has rent them asunder, ushering in a new reality where I must now face the loneliness of honest defiance. Even as the silence that follows is as much an answer as it is a condemnation, I sense the stirring of a latent power, one born of the courage to reclaim my own worth from the ruins of betrayal. That night, the world outside my window wore a shroud of inky darkness, punctuated only by the distant twinkle of city lights. Unable to shake the raw betrayal of the day, I slipped into the embrace of solitude, a silent promise of change. I made my way to the small corner of my room that had long served as my refuge and retreat, a desk cluttered with journals, scribbled notes, old letters, and memories I never dared confront. Sitting there, I opened a fresh journal and began to pour out my tangled thoughts. Each word was a release, a small act of defiance against the chains of silent martyrdom I'd carried for so long. The ticking clock, a constant reminder of time past and the promise of tomorrow, became the steady pulse of my awakening. In this intimate, quiet vigil, I allowed myself to feel the hurt, the anger, and the burgeoning hope that something within me was shifting. As the hours stretched on, a symbolic act crystallized my inner resolve. With deliberate care, I gathered the letters and notes accumulated over years, a testament, in black and white, of every sacrifice and every slight. One by one, I arranged them near the fireplace, their fragile edges catching the light before I struck a match. In that moment, as the flames eagerly devoured the paper, I felt the weight of my past dissolve into the smoky night. The burning of these remnants was more than a simple purge of physical evidence. It was the ceremonial obliteration of my old self, a self valued only in terms of duty and sacrifice. The fire's reflection danced across my tear-streaked face, carving out a silent promise. I would no longer be exploited, no longer be the family's endless reserve. Rising from the ashes of that symbolic retreat, I vowed to establish boundaries that would guard my self-worth. No longer would my generosity be measured in dollars or allowances. I was reclaiming the fierce, unyielding love I owed myself. This newfound resolve was the cornerstone of my transformation, a powerful decision to choose self-respect over martyrdom. Chapter 7: Establishing Boundaries and Self-Worth. In the quiet hours of a new day, I found myself once again settling at my desk. The remnants of the past, old letters, crumpled receipts, and the raw pain of betrayal now lay replaced with a single crisp blank page. This was not just any page. It was the beginning of a farewell to my old self. With a steady hand, I began drafting a letter to my family, a definitive message outlining the boundaries I was establishing, a clear demarcation of what I would no longer tolerate. Every word I penned carried the weight of years spent giving without return, yet in its cadence was a newfound firmness, the echo of a heart that had learned its worth. I wrote of love, the kind that is unconditional yet not self-sacrificing, of respect that must be mutual, and of the clear lines that would now govern my interactions. I wrote, "I am no longer a limitless resource, defined solely by my ability to fill your needs," a sentence that resonated deeply with the empowered core I was beginning to recognize within myself. With each carefully chosen phrase, I dismantled the old narrative, replacing it with the promise of self-respect. Later that day, as the soft aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled my cluttered kitchen, Ava arrived at my doorstep. A longtime friend and mentor, Ava had become the sounding board for my emerging truths. Sitting across from each other at our favorite table, she gently reviewed my letter. "Elena," she said with compassionate resolve, "this isn't the anger of one wronged. It's the strength of someone reclaiming what's been lost. Your words are your armor now." Her affirmation helped solidify the resolve I felt burning within. The friend who had always seen the best in me now reflected back the fierce value I had begun to grasp. Encouraged by Ava's supportive presence, I resolved to share my newly set terms with my family. I knew the conversation would be turbulent, an unavoidable confrontation with years of imbalance, but I also knew that my self-worth was not up for negotiation. With Ava's steady reassurance echoing in my mind, I steeled myself for the inevitable discussions ahead. This was my declaration. I would no longer be defined by my sacrifices alone, and my boundaries were as sacred as the love I owed myself. In that moment, amidst thoughtful pauses and encouraging smiles, I understood that true power lies not in placating others, but in honoring one's own value. The rules of engagement were set, and with them came the promise that every future interaction would be measured not by depletion, but by mutual respect, a foundation upon which my emerging self could finally thrive. After the storm of confrontation and self-discovery, I found myself drawn to a quieter, yet equally vibrant realm, one free of hidden expectations and transactional exchanges. Seeking solace and authenticity, I began venturing outside the confines of my once toxic familial circle. It didn't take long for new allies to appear, each with scars that mirrored my own and hearts determined to transform pain into purpose. One crisp Saturday morning, I attended a community gathering at a local arts center, a scheduled trust-building event designed for people with stories to share. The space hummed with the gentle buzz of honest conversation, laughter unburdened by ulterior motives, and the soft strains of acoustic music that invited vulnerability. I met Darren, a thoughtful man whose quiet eyes held the wisdom of someone who had overcome a lifetime of emotional neglect, and Zara, whose resilience shone through every smile, even after years of being let down by those meant to protect her. Their stories, delivered in gentle tones and heartfelt pauses, resonated with my awakening need for real connection. Throughout the day, I participated in circles of conversation where we discussed our journeys, sharing moments of hardship, hope, and renewal without the necessity to justify our feelings. One dialogue in particular still lingers in my memory. As we sat in a close, confidential circle, Zara confided, "For the first time, I feel I'm being seen, not for what I provided, but for who I truly am." In that moment, I understood that genuine care was neither calculated nor conditional. It was simply care, expressed with openness and respect, a sharp contrast to the cold ledger of my past. As the sun set over the gathering, I felt a warmth that had long been absent from my life. The interactions of the day slowly rebuilt my faith in authentic bonds, replacing the transactional echoes of my old world. I realized that these new relationships, built upon shared vulnerability and mutual respect, were the bridges leading me away from exploitation and toward a life where my worth was recognized simply for being me. Chapter 9: Foundation for Working Students, Turning Pain into Purpose. The public launch unfolded on a crisp autumn evening in a community center transformed by soft lighting and hopeful murmurs. I stepped onto the stage with a steady heart and a quiet determination. Here, amidst an audience of working students, educators, and activists, my pain was not my weakness, but the cornerstone of my newfound purpose. I introduced the event as the launch of the Empowerment Bridge Foundation, a platform dedicated to turning personal hardship into actionable support for students striving to balance work and education. In a calm yet impassioned tone, I shared my own story, detailing the subtle betrayals, the unyielding exploitation, and the slow-burning transformation that led me to reclaim my self-worth. As the words spilled out, I saw eyes glisten with empathy and resolve. In that moment, I realized that my journey had the power to inspire others, to remind them that no one is destined to be defined by sacrifice alone. After the event, the air buzzed with conversations that felt remarkably different from the transactional exchanges of my past. I found myself immersed in discussions at little tables and clusters of chairs arranged in intimate circles. It wasn't long before Marcus, a young man whose tentative smile battled the weight of his own burdens, approached me. I recognized in him a kindred spirit, a diligent, hard-working student overwhelmed by the pressures of supporting his family while chasing his educational dreams. With sincere care, we stepped aside from the lively chatter into a quieter corner of the room. Marcus's voice, barely above a whisper, carried years of anxiety and self-doubt. I've been carrying so much, juggling work, studies, and expectations, that I'm not even sure who I am anymore. Listening to you tonight, I realized that I deserve more than constant sacrifice. I listened intently, nodding, as the raw honesty in his words bridged the gap between his struggles and my own journey. In that intimate moment, I offered him what had taken me years to grasp. "Marcus, I know how it feels to be measured by what you give rather than who you are. My foundation is built on the belief that your worth isn't tied to endless obligations. We will work together so that you can pursue your dreams without the burden of exploitation weighing you down. That conversation, tender and transformative, wasn't just a promise, it was a pact. In mentoring Marcus, I was not only guiding him toward practical solutions like balancing time, accessing resources for tuition, and managing work hours, I was also sharing the emotional armor I had forged through years of silent endurance. Every piece of advice, every whispered reassurance, was a reminder that we were both reclaiming our narratives. That night, as the event wound down and I reflected on the evening's journey, I realized that the foundation was more than an organization. It was a lifeline for those who had, like me, weathered storms of betrayal. The day of the reunion arrived cloaked in an unsettling mixture of anticipation and dread. I had received the invitation, or rather the unspoken summons, from my family to gather under the pretense of reconciliation. Yet, as I approached the familiar front door, heavy with memories of both comfort and betrayal, I knew that what awaited inside was a decisive reckoning with the past. Stepping into the dining room, I found Catherine and Charles seated at one end, their eyes averted and tense. Nathan lingered nearby, his demeanor guarded and uncertain. The air was thick with unspoken apologies and the desperate hope to restore what once was, yet I could feel that time had altered everything. With a composed yet resolute tone, I broke the stifling silence. "I invited you here because there are truths we can no longer bury," I began, my voice clear and unwavering. "For years, I have sacrificed my comfort, my resources, and my self-respect, all in the name of family. Today, I demand that we unmask our past for the sake of an honest future." As the words left my lips, a charged energy rippled through the room. Catherine's eyes filled with a conflicted sorrow, and Charles shifted uncomfortably, his silence betraying more than any words could. Nathan's face, once accustomed to trivializing my contributions, now mirrored the internal conflict of guilt and realization. The reunion was no longer a sentimental gathering, but the battlefield for our deepest wounds. I pressed on, detailing the unheeded whispers and the musty ledger of bank statements that had laid bare my exploitation. "You treated my care as a commodity. I was your bank, a resource to be drawn upon without acknowledgement, without appreciation." Each sentence reverberated in that once familiar room, forcing every attendee to confront the accumulation of small betrayals that had, over time, eroded the genuine warmth of our familial bond. In that heated moment, their defenses rose like walls of denial, but mine were unyielding, a newly fortified shield powered by self-worth and the promise of liberation. The confrontation reached its zenith when I paused, letting the charged silence speak for a heartbeat before continuing. It was in that pregnant pause that I experienced a moment of catharsis, a clear pivot from a desire for retribution to one of profound self-reclamation. I stand before you not with a wish for revenge, but with a demand for respect, for the right to define my own identity. I am done being your safety net, your financial lifeline, or a convenient deposit in your unspoken accounts. This is my truth, and I will no longer allow old patterns of exploitation to dictate who I am. The words fell heavy in the space, met with a mix of stunned silence and murmurs stirred by the raw clarity of my declaration. In that decisive moment, I witnessed the transformation, not just of the conversation, but of myself. The confrontation, once poised to be mired in unresolved bitterness, evolved into an assertion of my identity. I was no longer seeking to punish, but simply to affirm my inherent dignity. As my words settled over the room like a lasting decree, I realized that this final showdown was less about extracting apologies and more about severing the chains that had long bound me to an old, deceptive way of life. The fallout was both immediate and irrevocable. My family, confronted with the magnitude of their actions, retreated into silence. each grappling with their own remorse and regret. Yet within me, a profound relief blossomed, an affirmation that I had not faltered under the weight of the past, but had instead chosen a future defined by integrity and self-respect. In that transformative moment, I reclaimed more than my voice. I reclaimed my identity. In the stark quiet after our cathartic confrontation, I found myself turning inward, seeking solace in the gentle act of self-compassion. I began attending weekly therapy sessions in a sunlit room at a community center, a space filled with soft music and the quiet rustle of pages from my fellow seekers. There, with each session, I carefully unraveled the tapestry of past betrayals, learning to recognize the difference between who I was forced to be and who I yearned to become. My therapist, with empathetic nods and reflective questions, helped me trace the origins of my self-sacrifice, urging me to honor the parts of me that had long remained hidden in the shadows. Each shared moment and quiet tear was a stitch in the new fabric of my resilience. Later, one cool autumn afternoon, I found myself drawn once more to the lake house, the place that had once been a silent emblem of my exploitation. Approaching it as a distant observer rather than its erstwhile caretaker, I sat on its weathered porch, letting the gentle ripple of the lake mirror the gradual ease settling inside me. As I traced my fingertips over the rough wood of a railing, memories of past obligations mingled with the simple beauty of the present. In that reflective solitude, the lake house transformed from a monument of manipulation into a beacon of quiet strength, a physical reminder that sometimes returning to the site of old wounds can pave the way for healing. Back at home, I began to celebrate small victories that resonated with the newfound respect I held for myself. Late evenings found me immersed in creative pursuits, rediscovering a love for painting with bold splashes of color that spoke of hope, or pouring thoughts into a journal that now brimmed with honest reflections rather than resigned acceptance. On one particularly luminous day, I organized a modest gathering with a few trusted friends, new allies whose genuine care had blessed my path. Over warm cups of herbal tea and shared laughter, I discovered the profound difference between relationships built on obligation and those that blossomed from authentic connection. Each therapeutic interlude, each solitary moment spent in reflection, and each brushstroke on canvas built a reservoir of self-worth too significant to be measured by past exploitation. My journey of healing was not marked by a single event, but by a series of small, deliberate acts of self-affirmation, a gradual yet steadfast return to who I was always meant to be. And with every step forward, I carried with me the unwavering truth that my value lies not in the currency of sacrifice, but in the pure, untainted light of my own dignity. Each therapeutic interlude, each solitary moment spent in reflection, and each brushstroke on canvas built a reservoir of self-worth too significant to be measured by past exploitation. My journey of healing was not marked by a single event, but by a series of small, deliberate acts of self-affirmation, a gradual yet steadfast return to who I was always meant to be. And with every step forward, I carried with me the unwavering truth that my value lies not in the currency of sacrifice, but in the pure, untainted light of my own dignity. Each therapeutic interlude, each solitary moment spent in reflection, and each brushstroke on canvas built a reservoir of self-worth too significant to be measured by past exploitation. My journey of healing was not marked by a single event, but by a series of small, deliberate acts of self-affirmation, a gradual yet steadfast return to who I was always meant to be. And with every step forward, I carried with me the unwavering truth that my value lies not in the currency of sacrifice, but in the pure, untainted light of my own dignity. The horizon welcomed the dawn with a radiant display of soft pinks and warm golds, a promise of renewal as undeniable as the breath in my lungs. Standing on my balcony, I watched the sunrise with a quiet awe, a symbolic farewell to a past defined by silent suffering and exploitation. For the first time in years, the gentle light felt not like a witness to my trials, but a herald of my rebirth. In that fleeting, sublime moment, I realized I had finally become the architect of my own destiny. That morning, I stepped into a modest auditorium filled with friends, colleagues, and those whose lives I had touched through the Empowerment Bridge Foundation. There, before a captivated audience, I spoke from the depths of a soul that had weathered the storm and learned to thrive. With measured resolve, I recounted the journey from the sting of betrayal to the embrace of self-respect, each painful chapter reimagined as a stepping stone towards empowerment. My words, once heavy with unspoken grief, now resonated with hope and determination. The applause that followed wasn't simply a response to my story. It was an acknowledgement that transformation, however arduous, is both possible and profoundly liberating. Later, in the quiet sanctuary of my favorite writing nook, I began the final reflections of my journey. Carefully, I illuminated the pages of a fresh journal with the ink of honesty and self-compassion. I wrote about every tear shed in solitude, every night spent wrestling with a ledger of emotional debts, and every hard-won moment of clarity that led me to decide I refuse to be defined by exploitation. That written testament became both a farewell to my past self and a celebration of the vibrant, resilient woman I had become. I acknowledged that while the scars of betrayal had once threatened to dim my light, they had ultimately paved the way for a transformative self-healing, a canvas on which I was free to paint a future entirely my own. As the day yielded to a serene twilight, the final chords of my journey echoed in the quiet spaces of my heart. I understood, profoundly, that life is not a tally of sacrifices made, but a masterpiece of reinvention, where every stroke of pain can be transformed into a beacon of strength. I had reclaimed my power, transcending the legacy of exploitation, to build a life defined by authenticity, purpose, and unyielding self-worth. The sunrise had taught me that each new day offers a fresh start, a chance to thrive, to love, and to honor the truth of who I am. I sent my parents $5,000 every month, then I saw their group chat calling me a family ATM.